This video is about my experience replacing the heat control valve in a 1979 Spider 2000 by Fiat. So the heat control valve is controlled by this lever right here. This is the closed position. This is the open position, allowing coolant to flow into the heater core. The heat control valve is right here, coming underneath the dash. It's pretty easy to spot. So when the cable is in the closed position, it looks like this. And there's a small dot that indicates the valve location right here. It's more of a stop, really. When you open the heat control valve, you can see that dot move up, which indicates that the valve has moved away from its seat, allowing coolant to flow into this pipe, through this chamber, and into the heater core. It goes through the heater core, back out the heater core through this pipe, out over the top here, and into the engine bay on the left-hand side. So I'm going to close this and show you from the outside. On the outside of the vehicle, the pipes that feed the heater core are located here for the inlet and here for the outlet. The inlet comes in right from the top of the head, and there was a T installed on this vehicle when I bought it, and it goes into the heat control valve, then into the heater core. The heater core is mounted right underneath here, where there is a plate that opens and closes, allowing airflow into the heater box so the fan can draw in air from the outside and heat it, spread it through the cabin. And after it goes through the coil, it comes out this hose, which goes down. You can kind of see that clamp down there. The hose comes out at 90-degree angle, then goes down, and it connects to a stem. And that stem has a T on it, and that T connects to this hose that goes over to this other side of the block, and it runs along a pipe right down there and connects in right here into where the water pump feeds coolant through the system. So it basically feeds off the block and throws it right back into where the water pump puts coolant back through the system. So to remove the heater core valve, I'm going to skip all the nonsense and common sense stuff about making sure your car is cool and you relieve the pressure in the system and all that. So what I did was I removed the hose for the feed to the heat control valve and the return back to the water pump. When you remove those, a little coolant is going to flow out of these hoses if you have not already drained the system. If the system is not pressurized, it should be a fairly small amount. When you go into the vehicle, this is a difficult space to work in, but believe it or not, I did not remove any of the consoles or the dash to do this project. There are a couple things you want to do. If your old valve is junk, then simply take this screw off, remove this lever. Then you can disconnect the spring. Then you can unscrew this screw, and that will release the cable. You can then pull your cable out and lubricate it. That's always good. And it gets this hardware out of the way, because there's two nuts that attach to the studs that go into the heater core. So these two studs come out of the heater core, and these two nuts attach this flange to the heater coil. On the back side, where the feed comes in, it's a very similar looking fitting to this one here. It's just at a different angle. So you have one bolt you must remove there, and another one on the back side. This bolt you can get at with a socket, not a problem. These bolts you can get at with a socket from this direction and then right up over here from that direction. The nut on the back you have to pretty much get it behind it like this and work it in very small increments to get it off the back of the flange. How did I do that? Well, 2 days earlier, I sprayed all of these areas with like a PB Blaster penetrating oil. I used WD-40 penetrating oil, not to get into brand wars, but I just used penetrating oil, and I sprayed these with penetrating oil. These nuts were really, really bad, really rusted. So what I did was I sprayed them, and then I scrubbed them with a bristle brush, and I scraped them a little bit with a screwdriver to make sure I get good traction on the nut itself and to make sure the tread pathways are clear. As I started to unbolt them, they were actually getting a little tighter as I unscrewed them. So I sprayed them again, screwed them back in, not all the way, sprayed them again, scraped them with a brush, screwed them out. They screwed out much easier. And I repeated that process over and over until it was evident that the nuts were going to come off on their own. But mind you, this was several days of soaking these nuts. So after several days of soaking these nuts, especially if you're driving the car, what's going to happen is this heats up. This is going to heat up from the coolant that's flowing through this assembly. If yours is not stuck in the closed position, this heat will draw the penetrating oil deeper into the threads and will help the whole process. But honestly, I had this thing off within 20 minutes. Now, the thing is, you can get these two nuts off, and if the cables are disconnected and whatnot, you could pull this assembly off of the heater core and pull that pipe out with this without even taking the feed flange off. The problem is that this flange is going to fuse most likely to the heater coil. So what I did was I took a small, and mine did, I could not pull this off by hand. These two studs look like they were welded to this flange. So the nuts were off, the studs were there, I could not pull it off. So I removed the two nuts on the back and we pulled the pipe off, and I tried to put my hand around this whole assembly and pull it off, and I could not pull it off. So what I did was I got a small screwdriver, a regular screwdriver, and I went up and tried to seat this as close to where the nut is as possible that I could get it until I found the gasket, so I wasn't putting it on the metal, or I wasn't putting it on the material of the heater core itself. I tried to get it in where the gasket is, and then I would tap the end of that screwdriver with a little ball peen hammer until I got some movement on the stud. The bottom stud came free first. I was able to wiggle it out just a little bit from the bottom, about a 1/16 of an inch, and that gave me enough ability to work it back and forth, and a little bit of a screwdriver wedge in there, tap tap with the hammer, and a good tug, and the whole thing came off. Then I was able to clean up the seats, put on new gaskets. You want to make sure you get the gaskets. If you get the kit, it says you need 3. You only need 3 if you're going to be changing your feed pipe. You only need 2, 1 and 2, if you're going to be changing your heat control valve. You only need 3 if you're going to be changing your return hook pipe. And putting it back together, you just seat the gaskets on the valve. What I did was I screwed the feed pipe onto the valve, and I got that in position. Used a little never sees on these bolts, and then I fed the pipe through the wall, tested it, make sure I had it going the correct angle. Then I put it on these studs and bolted that down. I hooked up my cable, tested my throw of my cable to make sure that at the fully closed setting that the unit was actually fully closed, and that's it. Job was done, and now it works beautifully. The only thing I can say about this is that when you're driving down the road, if you have the heater valve open, it's going to be introducing coolant into the core, and that's going to be flowing through the core and recirculating through the whole engine system. If you now want it to be cool and you close this valve, well, even on your coolest fall day, it's going to take a good 15 to 20 minutes for the cool air coming through that heater core to cool that hot coolant down enough, because it's a mini radiator. So you're gonna need a lot of flow coming through there before the car actually cools down. So my advice is, do not turn the heat on until you need it. Do not let hot water or coolant into the system until you need it. And then shut it off after a few minutes, because that residual heat is going to continue to warm the car. So if it's not the dead of winter and you don't need constant heat, you're going to have to cycle water or coolant in and out of the heater core to regulate the temperature to your liking. Otherwise, you're going to blast yourself right out of this car, because the heat works absolutely amazing, better than any modern car I've ever owned. And it's just this tiny little beast. So that's it.